tell me a bit about yourself, your career, and how you got into the work that you got into?
I believe that the way that I got into my work was a childhood experience. My elder brother, sustained a brain injury, and so I saw directly that we somehow, as people, as personalities, this is somehow also a bodily organ. So I was confronted early on by that. I wouldn't call it a mystery. It was rather a shock that how come my brother is no longer the same person, and who's this guy, and and where's the old one gone to, and all of that. So I'm pretty sure that was why I became interested later on in not only in neuroscience but in neuropsychology in particular, that branch of neuroscience which studies the relationship between brain and mind. But that was in the early 1980s that I trained in that field, and I was rapidly disappointed to discover that there wasn't much mind there. It was more sort of neurobehaviorism than neuropsychology. And that's because psychology suffers from the embarrassment that its object of study is subjective. The mind is first and foremost something subjective. You can only ever observe your own, literally. How do you do science which aspires to objectivity with something that is inherently subjective? And that's why we had this thing called behaviorism, where psychology bizarrely excluded the psyche from psychology. It literally ruled the mind out. Internal states were not a proper thing to study. And so we studied only behavior. I take the view that science has to adjust its methods to its objects of study. You can't adjust your object of study to your methods. I know it's difficult, but subjectivity is part of nature. So that was what I was interested in, personhood, the self, experiential being. It's an extraordinary thing. It attaches only, as far as we know, it attaches only to this organ, the brain, and surely it does something. That is consciousness, sentient beings evolved for a reason. And if we leave it out of the science of the mind, or in my case, the science of neuropsychology, then we're never going to understand how this part of nature works. So with that in mind, I took the unusual step of training also in psychoanalysis, which I did in your country. And my colleagues were horrified. They said it's like an astronomer studying astrology. But with all of its faults, psychoanalysis has the great advantage that it places front and center the subjective mind. It studies the lived life of the mind. And that's what I felt was lacking. So I then proceeded to try to bring into neuropsychology some of the terms and concepts and some of the sort of just a language and a theoretical sort of construction which we could use as a starting point to begin to study these aspects of the brain. And I did so by studying how mental life, thus described and thus studied, the actual subjective being of my patients. How was their personality changed by damage to their brains? I also did a big study on brain mechanisms of dreaming. Dreams are a quintessential subjective state, and also a function which played a big part in the development of psychoanalytical theory. So I'm really giving you a very fast tour through decades, but it was through the study of brain mechanisms of sleep and dreaming that I became interested in or became au fait with brain mechanisms of consciousness, and sleep and wakefulness are regulated by brain stem structures. It turns out those same structures are responsible for affect, as we call it. In other words, valenced feeling, pleasant and unpleasant feelings. And so that in turn led me to to focusing on brain mechanisms of emotion, which obviously is again a major point of overlap between the neurosciences and psychoanalysis, and indeed all of psychiatry. So that's a whistle stop tour through my working life, well, through my life.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It's since your work focuses then on a something that's perhaps ignored, the subjective experience and experience of our life, our world, consciousness. This might be a difficult question, but to kind of jump right into it, how do we get what is experience? And the question I had almost is, can we separate our experience from what we mean by the word consciousness? Like, is experience consciousness? Is that a meaningful question to ask? Because sometimes, for example, reading about your work, it seems that we can't, like, we can. I'm just trying to think, what would it mean to experience something without sort of, sometimes consciousness doesn't seems like a weird problem that we're stuck on, because I don't understand how what I experience would be different from consciousness. Like, to have colors, to have sight without conscious experience of it seems weird to me. But then maybe some of your work challenges that. I'm not sure. So would you be able to speak about that?
We have a problem with terminology in this field, basically because different people use these terms to denote different things. So all you can do, I mean, you can't legislate for your colleagues and say, this is how you have to use these terms. I think all you can do is be clear about how you yourself are using these terms. So for me, the mind, subjectively considered, which means experience, is not uniformly conscious. There are unconscious mental processes. It's possible, demonstrably, experimentally demonstrated innumerable times. It's possible to perceive, for example, without being aware of what you're perceiving. It's possible to learn without being aware of what you're learning. Your subsequent actions are influenced by what you've perceived and what you've learned, but you're not aware of having done so. So I think that the word experience doesn't have to mean conscious experience. Now, what do we mean by conscious experience? That unfolds over various levels of complexity. The most basic definition is not the most basic, the most basic definition that I align myself with, but which also does seem to be quite universally accepted nowadays, is the definition given by Thomas Nagel, a philosopher, who wrote a famous article with the wonderful title, "What is it like to be a bat?" That was in 1974. And that phrase, "what is it like?" To be conscious is for there to be something it is like to experience your perceptions or your cognitions. So that's a very rudimentary definition. It just means that there is a phenomenal qualitative feel to your processing of information. Think about it. I've said to you already that we can perceive and learn without consciousness being attached to the processes. The same applies to this computer we're busy communicating via. Clearly, it's perceiving. And as you know, our computers have memory functions. Even our phones have this functionality. Our phones can take photographs where they recognize faces and all of that. So the fact that there is something it is like to do all of that, that's the conscious bit of it. I, for reasons that no doubt we'll get to, believe that the most rudimentary form of consciousness is simply raw feeling, in the sense of affects like feeling too hot, feeling thirsty, feeling pain, feeling sleepiness. This registering the state of your body so that it feels like something to be in these states. Those raw affective states, I think, is the most basic form of consciousness. And as I said, I'd be very happy to explain why. But then secondly, a second level of complexity is it's not just a matter of I feel like this, it's that I feel like this about that. So it's an application of your feeling to the context which is producing it, so that you become aware of what is making you feel this way and what the consequences are of your acting on that environment that's making you feel this way. So that's a sort of second level. You might think of the first level as sort of first person consciousness. It's just meanness, just being. Then it's being in a world. So that's second person sort of perspective. A differentiation between subject and object. And then there's a third level, which goes by various names. People, probably the most widely used term is reflective consciousness, although some people speak of access consciousness. And that is the ability to transcend your own egocentric perspective and to look back upon yourself as an object. So in other words, to put yourself in the shoes of the object and to look back upon yourself objectively. This is what we mean by reflective consciousness. And that's a third person point of view. And us human beings, most of our consciousness goes on up there. It's a higher order form of consciousness. So many people, when they use the word consciousness, they mean that. But I think that a great deal is to be gained if we break it down to its more fundamental form, if we're wanting to understand at a basic level what is consciousness in the first place, and how does it work, why did it evolve, what does it do, and that's been my main focus.
When you talk about, say, a computer doing things, having memory, things like this, would you say that's a kind of consciousness? Am I getting you completely wrong? Is that like a very preliminary sort of stage in it, or or how should we think about that? Because you kind of mentioned that it is, maybe there is something like it to be like that.
Well, this leads us directly to why I'm focusing on affect. So let me explain briefly what affect is. I mentioned earlier things like feeling too hot, feeling thirsty, feeling pain, feeling sleepy. These are states of the body which we register as a qualitative, phenomenological, subjective state. What those all the mechanism that underpins those basic forms of feeling is called homeostasis. Homeostasis is probably the most basic mechanism in all of biology. It is what keeps every living thing alive. Each living thing, and I mean, all the way down to bacteria, plants, every living thing functions homeostatically. And what this means is that there's certain bounds that are viable for living things. So to use ourselves as examples, we have to remain within a temperature range roughly 36.5 to 37.5 degrees Celsius. If you move out of that range, your life is in danger. The same applies to the amount of water in your body, the amount of sugar in your body, the amount of oxygen in your body, etc. We have to remain within the range that's viable for us. Moving out of that range requires, it's a demand that the body has to do something. It's a demand for work. Homeostasis entails working to remain within your viable bounds. That's what living things do. Non-living things don't give a damn. Okay. And there already we're beginning to differentiate ourselves from computers. Computers aren't trying to survive, but we are. And how do we know when we're moving out of our viable bounds? Well, at the most basic level, there are unconscious reflexes, which just the reflex is like a prediction. If I do this, I will return to my viable bound. So, for example, if I get too hot, I perspire and I breathe in a more shallow and rapid way. That cools me down. So throughout our bodies, we have mechanisms like this. But the reflex only works in the situation which is predicted by evolution. So let me use the example I use in my book. I said that we have to maintain a certain oxygen level. And the way that we do that is we've got a thing in our brains detecting the oxygen level, and it just drives a reflex, which is to expand your chest. And you maintain your oxygen level that way. But now, what if you're in an unpredicted situation, like a carbon dioxide filled room? Now the reflex doesn't do it because you're breathing in carbon dioxide, and you then feel air hunger or suffocation alarm, and that guides your action. If you didn't have feeling, all you could do is act randomly. And there's a small percentage chance that you will do the right thing, but there's a much bigger chance that you won't, and you'll cop it. So feeling tells you, okay, I'm going upstairs. I've never been in a burning building. I don't know what to do. I'll go up there. When you do that, you feel worse. Your suffocation alarm becomes more extreme. So you change your mind, you make a choice, and you go downstairs instead. There's more oxygen, and you feel the relief. So the feeling guides your actions in states of uncertainty. It's an enormous biological adaptive advantage. And so that's what feelings are for. And that's what computers don't have, for the reason that I said earlier. They're unlike us. They don't have a value system, which is an existential value system. For us, it just is bad to move out of homeostasis, and unpleasurable feelings mean I am going in the wrong direction. Pleasurable feelings mean I'm going in the right direction. So we have categories of feeling that coincide with the different categories of biological need. And so we register these pleasures and unpleasures in these different qualitative flavors. And that tells us how well or badly we're doing in relation to our viable bounds. Now, it is not impossible to engineer an artificial agent on those same principles. It just hasn't been done, but I don't think it's impossible. So to your point, are computers conscious? Well, I don't think they are, just because they're processing visual information, just because they're learning. That is like our own unconscious reflex sort of processes. They just happen automatically, and they always do the same thing. There's no choice involved. The crucial step is that we're able to make choices rooted in a value system, that value system being the basic biological one, that survival is good and death is bad. And on that basis, we make choices. That is to say, we have voluntary action. We rise above the level of automaticity. So that's basically, I've now done two things. I've told you the rudiments of how feelings work, what they're for, why consciousness exists at all, and also why the computers that we use, not having that basic architecture, I think there's no reason to believe that the computer gives a damn and therefore has feelings.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you would put such an important emphasis on emotions and feelings, because I suppose from my own sense of thinking and learning about consciousness, it's the sight and smell and the perception that's most important. But to actually think, no, actually emotions are not necessarily the most complex, or maybe they are, but they could be, and they're certainly important, as you say, but that they actually kind of are the traces and the thing which tells us that, that it means interesting too that we have to be an agent, right? We have to value things, and so It makes me even think, it's kind of a deeply and important evolved thing that we have these emotions, and that makes me think like with a computer, maybe you could do it, but I'm also I wonder if you like were to engineer a computer, like is it like what do we even mean by emotions? Like would it even be possible to make something have emotions, or is it something that's actually kind of difficult and almost something that that evolution has come across as like an invention almost, but that it's actually though important, does this make sense that, how do emotions come about, and what are they?
Yeah, I think I've already said how affects come about. These are basic. They're more basic. That emotions are quite complex affects. But let me just quickly speak about emotions. So they also function homeostatically. So fear, for example, its viable bounds are I am not in danger. That's where you need to be. If you are in danger, you feel fear, and you feel relief if you escape the danger. In other words, if the prediction works, if the thing that you do brings you back to safety. Rage, the viable bounds for that is there's nothing, no frustrating impediment, nothing standing between me and what I want, nothing getting in my way. If there is, then you start feeling irritated, angry, enraged, and then you do something to get rid of the impediment. So it's like attachment, which is we mammals attach to each other. The prediction is my attachment, my caregiver, the person whose love and attention and care I need, and we mammals need it. We are born unable to look after ourselves. If we become separated from that person, we feel separation distress, panicky anxiety, and then we do something to restore reunion. So emotions work in the same way. They're just more complex versions of the same type of mechanism as bodily feelings. Now you say, you'd never thought of it as being the most important thing. Well, the most important thing is to stay alive. And the things I've just said, although they're emotions, I hope you can see why they're biologically important. I mean, even something like rage, if you can't fight for your share, you're going to be left out, and eventually you've had it. So these are biologically important things. We don't experience them as biological. We don't have a knowledge of where they come from in evolution, but all we have is the feelings. And then I want to say, I think it's a pretty obvious fact once one draws attention to it, that everything we do is driven by feelings. We want to feel good. We avoid things which are bad, and we want to repeat and approach things that make us feel good across a wide range of different emotions. But really, that's why we do everything we do. And as I said earlier, it works like this. At the lowest level, it's just I feel like this. I feel pain. Then comes I feel this about that, and then it's like, where is the thing? What is the thing that's causing the pain? The only reason that we perceive the world and learn about the world and think about the world consciously is because that's the world is the place where our needs, the only place where our needs can be met. So we apply our feelings, we bestow meaning upon the world through feeling our way into it. And so I think that it's a mistake, although our experience, is focuses on the objects in the world, for the reason I've just said to you. It's a mistake to study only perception or learning or cognition, because all of that is in the service of meeting our needs. So the feelings, the registering of our needs, I think is where we should focus our attention in terms of trying to understand what consciousness is all about. So my colleagues, for the most part, until very recently, the focus has been on the cortex, the part of the brain that registers the outside world consciously. And I'm saying, no, we should, if we're wanting to understand how this thing called consciousness works, we need to go right down deep into the brain stem, where the feelings come from. The feelings are basic arousal states. And it is, interestingly, a physiological fact that if you damage just a small region of these arousal structures in the brainstem, then lights out in the cortex. So the cortex is not where the consciousness is generated. The consciousness is generated in the brainstem, and then it arouses or activates the cortex. So it's like feeling your way into your perceptions and cognitions, so it's not just for theoretical reasons that I think we should look at this most basic form. It's literally physiologically, demonstrably the case that this most basic form is prerequisite for all the other forms.
When you say it like that, and it kind of makes me think that, the typical things you might think of as consciousness, whether that's in the brain and the cortex, and its perception and what we actually see. You're saying, well, actually, no, the world is so complex, right? That our attention and what we choose to see, what needs we choose to meet, like that must be something which sort of activates and facilitates the other parts of the brain, right? And so they then kind of have to work in unison. So that's very interesting. It kind of makes me want to ask, why have emotions been kind of ignored, in your opinion, by other people, and why? And you say there that we've had a view of consciousness as being in the cortex. So could you speak a bit about that? How do you think we should rethink about our brain and how we conceive of the different parts and what aspects of our experience they generate?
I think emotions have been neglected in the science of the mind and the brain, and I think that the reason for that, the primary reason for that, is the thing that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. Emotions are subjective. And subjectivity is a dirty word in science. What could be more subjective than your feelings? It's your feelings. What those feelings are about. These are objects in the outside world that we can all point to, and then we can do proper science. So it's I think that is the primary reason why we have focused on those aspects of mental life that lend themselves to verifiable, measurable things, or at least more easily verified and more easily measured and experimentally manipulable things. But as I said to you at the beginning of our conversation, just because something is difficult to study doesn't mean you can leave it out. You're going to end up with a grossly incomplete, I would say, a psychology that's not only incomplete, but a psychology that's lacking its foundations. The basic driving force of everything in the mind, as I say, is our needs, and our needs are what we feel as affects and emotions. They've been neglected for that reason, but very much to the detriment of science and obviously especially of mental science. Having said that, it's also not that difficult to see why we began with perception and visual perception in particular, because just look at what you're experiencing right now consciously. It's dominated by vision, and secondarily at this point, because we're conversing with each other, by hearing, and then it's by somatic sensation, sort of proprioception, as we call it, the sensation of your own body, and then to a lesser extent now, but maybe a little later today, taste and smell will enter into the picture. This sort of intuitively seems to be what consciousness is made of. The raw ingredients of consciousness are our 5 perceptual modalities. But forgive me if I'm repeating myself, But all of those perceptual modalities can and do function unconsciously. You're perceiving unconsciously all the time. And learning from those as perceptions and being altered. Your behavior is altered by those perceptions. So the question is, why are some of our perceptions conscious? It's got to do with what we attend to, what matters to us. The world, this outside world that you and I are experiencing, is very different from the world that a bat experiences, or a shark, or an ant. We sample those aspects of the world that matter to us, depending on our phenotypic needs, as we call them. In other words, what kind of species we are.
Yeah, and it's I'm kind of understanding your very interesting perspective on consciousness now, in that, as you say, we can learn, we can even see and hear and things unconsciously, in that, like, we have, for example, experiences like blind sight, where people can say navigate rooms, but they don't have experience of seeing it, things like this. But then I would suppose you would say that emotions are, like, it would make no sense to have emotions that are unconscious. Like, they are very tangibly the thing we experience. So you could say that they're, they are subjective, you could say they're primitive, whatever, but then they're actually kind of an important source of consciousness. So that's very interesting.
Well, what you've just said, Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's so important that I do want to make sure it gets due emphasis. What you've just said, let me rephrase it. Feelings, you can't have a feeling if you don't feel it. Feelings are necessarily conscious things, and that does not apply to any of the other things that we've been talking about. Now, that is the big mistake that was made in my science, is we focused on those other things. Trying to understand consciousness, we studied vision. And my point is, why start with a function which is not intrinsically conscious? Only feelings must be felt. If you understand the mechanism of feelings, you have necessarily understood the mechanism of consciousness, or at least a mechanism of consciousness. And for all the reasons I briefly alluded to earlier, it is also the fundamental form of consciousness. So I think it is the obviously correct place to start. We did really take a wrong turn in my field by starting with types of information processing which are not intrinsically conscious. But you can't have an unconscious feeling.
You talked earlier about your work on dreams. I'm very interested to hear what you've learned about the brain experience from dreams, and I wonder if it has any bearing on how to understand consciousness. It might not, but I wonder if you could speak a bit about what you learned studying dreams.
Yes, well, I was very fortunate. Fortunate, that is, to make a discovery when I was rather young. And of course, discoveries in science, especially when you're young, they come to you as flukes. It was just a piece of good luck. I was studying a very large series of patients with tumors and strokes and so on. And these patients, groups of them had damage to different areas of the brain, and I was looking at what the effect is on dreams. What consequences does it have for dreams if you have damage here or there or there or there? And what I found by accident, as I said, was that the part of the brain that generates REM sleep. REM sleep is a physiological state that we're in when we dream. In other words, they're correlated with each other, REM sleep and dreaming. So I was absolutely shocked to discover that my patients who had damage to the part of the brain that generates REM sleep, they continued to experience dreams, all of them. And yet I had another group of patients who continued to experience REM sleep, but lost the experience of dreams. So that we call a double dissociation of function in my field. If damage to area A leads to a loss of function A but preservation of function B, and damage to area B leads to loss of function B but preservation of function A, that means function A and B are two separate things. So that's what I showed or found in the late 1990s. It was that dreaming and REM sleep are not the same thing. They're driven by two different brain mechanisms. So then, of course, the interest attaches to, well, what's driving the dreams? So I was able to demonstrate that it's a circuit which is called forgive the technical term, it's called the mesocortical mesolimbic dopamine system. And it is the most widely used term for it in behavioral neuroscience is the brain reward system. The reward system. In other words, it has everything to do with feelings, and it's the most basic motivational mechanism in the mammal brain. It's basically what makes us explore the world. It drives interest and curiosity, and the behavior that it drives is foraging, sort of exploring. So I use the word foraging. We only use that word for animals, but it's sort of what makes you interested in something that's novel. It's what makes you curious. It's what makes you want to go to a film that you haven't seen yet, read a book that you haven't read before, and so on. It's the basic motivator of why we engage. It makes us engage with the world for very good reason biologically, because I remember what I said, everything you need is out there. So to explore and engage and optimistically expect to find good things out there, that's what that system does. And so I said to you earlier, it was my dream research that led me to focusing on the brain stem and on these basic affective mechanisms, which turn out also to be the mechanisms that drive consciousness. Dreams, let us not forget, the defining feature of dreams is that they're conscious. I mean, you're asleep. And yet you have these conscious experiences. So these are motivated. I mean, everybody knows from their dreams that they're very emotional states of, they're aroused states of mind. And so that's the most basic thing I found about dreams, is that, first of all, it's not the same as REM sleep. Secondly, it's driven by a brainstem, a system rooted in the brainstem, which motivates the forebrain via this dopamine pathway that I mentioned. And so that was the first of those brain arousal systems that I became deeply acquainted with. And then I wanted to know more.
Do you know why, or have a good reason for why dopamine and the reward systems would activate sort of as we sleep, at a time where there's no external stimulus and we're not actually engaged in the real world, actually trying to get rewards, and sort of what's going on there?
Yes, so sadly, now we reach a point where I can only offer conjectures, because there isn't agreement in my field about why. The fact that it does happen is a great mystery, because it's the last thing you would expect while you're asleep. This system, which drives the most energized exploratory behaviors, why should this be lit up like a Christmas tree? And it is during dreaming sleep. So one view is that when you're offline, as it were, you're not engaging with the here and now world with all of its risks and opportunities. Now you're offline, you're asleep, and it's a kind of housekeeping. So rather than exploring the outside world and dealing with whatever surprises come at you, you can disengage from that, and you can explore your own what we call generative model, which is basically your own memory systems. You can explore, what have I learned today, and what lessons are to be learned from this. There's good evidence that a lot of, well, actually, the very greater part of our memory consolidation processes happen during sleep. So, memory consolidation just basically means, what am I going to hold on to and what am I going to let go of? What am I going to consolidate and what am I going to forget? So there has to be some sort of search process involved in all of this. It is a motivated process. It's just an engagement not with the outer world, but rather with the inner world, and in particular with new learning, with what you've learned. What should you discard and what should you retain? That's a widely held view, but it's not universally accepted. Another common view is that dreams are important for emotion regulation and for problem solving. Well, I think those are the same thing. It's just saying the same thing. What you've learned is learning what you've learned during the day. When stripped down to bare essentials, biologically speaking, it's learning how to meet your needs. And so that entails problem solving and emotion regulation, bearing in mind what I said to you about emotion. But I can't resist mentioning, since, as I told you, I also trained in psychoanalysis. I can't resist mentioning that Freud, all those years ago, was of the view that we're trying to fulfill our wishes in our dreams. That is a striking insight from more than 100 years ago, that this is a motivated state in which we're trying to achieve something. But when I said this is a contested area, that is a much more contested theory than the one that dreams are a form of memory processing and problem solving and emotion regulation.
It's interesting that these dual strands that we can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what dreams are about. Like when you say it's problem solving, but also Freud says wish fulfillment. I mean, it makes me think they're not necessarily contradictory, because I was talking to the neuroscientist Carl Friston recently, and he was talking about how, when you dream, you kind of, there's no sensory perception. So the way I understand it, he was saying that you're then just trying to find really simple models, really simple explanations for things. And so you're kind of going, okay, maybe you were making mistakes when you were awake, so what's the simplest, most parsimonious, easy path to get to something? And that might help us, explore and attain our wishes and things. And it's going, hey, look, you want this thing, or then here's a simple solution to it that you might be missing. So that's it's very interesting.
Yes, I'm very sympathetic with Carl Friston's view of what's going on in the dreaming brain. But if you think about what you just said, that is memory consolidation. The simplifying of your predictive model is discarding sort of irrelevant or useless or overly complex aspects of the model, and consolidating it. In other words, retaining what is generalizable, what is reliable, and getting rid of the fluff. That is consolidation. And as he said, you can do that because there's no sensory inputs. So you're not having to deal with new learning at that time. You can do housekeeping on what happened during the dream day.
Do you know why we forget dreams so easily, or why we I think I know. Apparently there's parts of our brains that record memories that aren't really activated, so like we aren't good at remembering dreams. So could you say anything about why we can't remember our dreams and why this happens?
I can say something which is kind of obvious, which is that it would be biologically inexpedient to remember events which actually didn't happen. So this is a virtual reality where you're busy doing this kind of housekeeping that we were just speaking of on past experiences, and discarding what is useless and so on, and then what is left from that process is what is retained in memory. But that process, the generating of counterfactual virtual realities, I can see no, I can see not only no good reason to remember it, but I can see good reasons not to remember it because, as I said, you would be deluding yourself that you experienced something that you didn't. Interestingly, in the neurological patients that I studied, there's a small group of them who do believe what they dreamed actually happened, and they get into very confused states of mind. Um, so that's a sort of a very general statement that I'm making, that I say I can understand from a sort of first principles why it's not a good idea to remember imaginary events as if they really happened, as we believe in our dreams that they're really happening.
Mm.
But the view that the reason we forget our dreams is because the memory systems are not operational during dreaming sleep. The brain, that's just not true. I mean, as I was
Oh,
just telling you, what we're doing is sifting through those memory systems very actively. The single biggest um, uh, cornerstone, as it were, of our memory systems is the hippocampus. Hippocampus is very active during dreaming. The amygdala, which is the main emotional memory system, also very active during dreaming. But so is the whole of the back half of the cortex, which is where we perceive, where we've laid down memory traces of what we perceived during the day. And the hippocampus is a sort of index of those things going on in the cortex. It's a sort of a lookup system
uh,
and a filing system. But the frontal cortex, that's the part that is deactivated, strikingly so during dreaming sleep. I spoke to you earlier about reflective consciousness. That's more than any other part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is the part that reflects back. It's sort of like the executive control center of our cognitions. And that's, if you think about your dreams, how they differ from your waking life, you're strikingly not in charge. You're not making this happen. It's happening to you. So there's much less executive control. And so the view that I think is quite widespread in my field, and I think quite tenable, is that it's this organizing, overarching sort of executive control system that because it is not operational during dreaming sleep, when it becomes operational again upon waking, it didn't have it wasn't part and parcel of what was happening in the dream. So you now shift into a different mode of memory functioning, which is this more executively controlled mode. And what happened during the night while it was deactivated is therefore not part of its experience.
no, it's very interesting that you say you actually had patients who, if they have a problem with their brain and they actually do remember dreams, that's problematic. Because I actually had an idea, which is that, yeah, we maybe don't remember our dreams because how could we distinguish them from ordinary memories, if that makes sense? Like it's not that obvious why there's a label on one memory which is real and another memory which is non-real. So that's kind of, that would actually get confusing, and like as you say, it literally does. I mean, one final thing I wanted to ask you, bring up reflective consciousness there. We've talked about sort of emotions in consciousness. What would be the role of that reflective, almost self-consciousness? What's the importance of that in our lived world?
Yeah. Well, I said to you that I think that the function of consciousness of every kind is to enable us to make choices so that we rise above automaticity. So it makes possible voluntary behavior. Now, at the higher level of that third level I was talking about, the reflective consciousness, which, as I said, has everything to do with the frontal cortex. It's not just a matter of trial and error. I'm just let me try. Like I was saying about the poor person who's caught in a carbon dioxide filled room and runs around, trying to escape. That's trial and error. If you have this higher order kind of consciousness, what you can do is have virtual, you can think your way through. If I were to do this, what would happen? If I were to do that, what would happen? So it's a kind of, in the safety of thought, Trial and error involves error. And if you're physically actually there, those errors can be bad for you. They can, in fact, be the end of you. So to imagine scenarios, this is an active constructing of future possibilities and thinking and feeling your way through what might happen if I were to do that. This is the great contribution of that part of the brain, and it is also the part of the brain that is most highly developed in us human beings. It's our evolutionary pride and joy compared to even the other primates. Is our how much more frontal cortex we have.
Thank you, thank you. Well, that's all I have to ask. So, where can people find your work, and any last things you want to say, and what's the future for you?
Well, I would say, first of all, that if they're deeply interested, they should read the last book that I wrote, which is called The Hidden Spring, with the subtitle A Journey to the Source of Consciousness. If they don't want to get themselves in that deeply, there's an article that's open access, freely available online. It's called The Free Energy Principle and the Hard Problem of Consciousness. If you just Google Mark Solms' Free Energy Principle, Hard Problem of Consciousness, it will come up. The same material covered in a much briefer form. Having mentioned Google, you Google me, you'll find endless. I have to say, it's not my doing. It seems that every time I give a lecture, these days it gets plonked onto YouTube. So there are plenty of lectures and podcasts and of course articles. I've written a lot on consciousness, on dreams, on emotion, on all the things that we've spoken about in this very interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you. I'll put the links that you say in the description. So yeah, and I appreciate you talking to me. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Mark.
Jack.
Thank you.
Great pleasure.